Hi, everyone. One thing before we get started, we are asking for you to bring us your listener questions. We are excited to produce 2 episodes for you featuring listener questions. Questions like, what diet should I eat while on chemo? Or what's going to happen to my love life after cancering? Or maybe something simple like, where do I get the best information on the internet? We're here for all of those questions and we'll get you the answers. So go to our website, www.cancering.com, and click on the questions page to submit your questions on the form.
Taking care of cancer patient is a privilege. So sitting there in the room, talking to the patient and his family about how we can tackle this cancer and reach the goal of the patient, that's a privilege. And I'm so happy that I have been in this position now. I'm able to help the patient relieve their anxiety and relieve their symptoms and suffering from cancer, and also help them to cure or at least control their cancer as much as we can.
Welcome to the Cancering Show. I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest. He's an expert in phase 1 clinical trials, which is how we develop the newest therapies for cancer treatment, and an oncologist who is already making a name for himself in gastrointestinal cancers, Dr. Ahmed Abdalla. On this episode, he and I will talk about the best ways to avoid rectal and intestinal cancers, the importance of clinical trials, the current treatment, and the future promise of immunotherapies and those targeted therapies to a tumor's genetic profile. We're also going to talk about the latest guidelines for colonoscopy tests, and I think we're going to throw in why you need a colonoscopy test, how it really goes beyond diagnosing colon cancer and could actually prevent it. Cancer is just something that we all have to recognize, acknowledge, cope with, live with, struggle with, rage upon, crush, and even thrive with. This show is more than knowing and fighting or beating cancer. It's more than just relaying science, hope, and technology. Together, our purpose is to demystify cancer, take away as much fear out of the diagnosis, treatment, and process as we can, defeat its grip on our lives. This is The Cancering Show. Dr. Abdalla, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
We're super excited to have you on the show for the first time. And first, I want to congratulate you and everybody on the team at USA Health who treats rectal cancer, because we've earned a national accreditation for our program. Tell us what that means and why it's important.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and we were so thrilled by being accredited by the NABRC, because we are first in the state to be accredited by the program.
That's huge.
It is. And it really tells about how our group worked together to reach this level. And this accreditation gives the patient confidence that everybody that make a decision about rectal cancer has contributed in his management, because we discuss every single case of rectal cancer in a multidisciplinary approach where surgical oncology, colorectal surgeon, medical oncology, radiation oncology, radiology, and pathology review all cases of rectal cancer and make a plan together how we are going to approach it and how we're going to reach the best outcome for the patient.
Fantastic. We've talked about this a little bit on our show before, but can you describe kind of to the patients and caregivers out there how that helps them, how that makes their care better even when they're not in the room?
So the center of any tumor board is a patient, and then every specialist contribute. So first what the patient diagnoses and what is his stage and what is his goals. So every patient has a different goals, and then we discuss as a team how we can reach that goals and how we can use our management and our tools to help him to get there. We have surgical, in the past, treatment of rectal cancer was only depend on the surgeon, and the surgeon make a decision about how the patient get treated and then ask for help from medical or radiation oncology. But nowadays, we bring every single case and we discuss it as a team, and then we were able to use our different tools to help the patient and reach the best outcome.
Yeah. I love the picture you painted of the patient in the center and this group, this team of providers. And every different discipline that has to do with cancer, kind of all looking to the patient's goals and making decisions based on that. I love that idea. And, just that picture speaks to our theme this season of the community surrounding cancering. And we don't talk enough about the community that is created within our health system teams. Tell me a little bit about your community on the GI team at MCI.
We have a very dedicated team that not only composed of physicians, but we are having other team members behind the scene. We have nurses, we have nurse navigator, we have nurse practitioner. They all work in a team to help coordinate the work and make sure everything happens on time. That is plus the different aspect of every physician. As a medical oncologist, I look at the rectal cancer in a specific way, and the surgeon look at the other side, and radiation oncology contribute from a different side. That's all plus what the pathologist can contribute, and also the radiologist. So having a different team members that look at the cancer at the same time will make sure we reach the best outcome possible.
Absolutely. And before we dive into treatment for colorectal cancers and other GI cancers, I wanted to back up a step because there's, my heart is in cancer prevention. Our listeners know that as well. And I wanted to make sure our listeners have heard that there's a new screening recommendation for colorectal cancer. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So U.S. Task Force has decreased the age that you need to do a colonoscopy for average risk patient. So now the recommendation is to start at the age of 45. This is for somebody who has an average risk. And I like you put it as prevention, not only screening, because colonoscopy is not just to detect early cancer, but also to prevent cancer, because colonoscopy is able to identify polyps that are precancerous and remove them before it turns into a malignancy. And the key for any cancer treatment is early detection. So having colonoscopy done at 45 rather than 50 can help our younger patient to have a better outcome in case they develop colon cancer.
Fantastic. And just for those people out there who say, I can't imagine myself signing up for a colonoscopy, and we always say the screening test that you're going to do is the best one for you. So can you tell our listeners just real quickly, what are their other options if they don't want to start with the colonoscopy?
Yes. So we have different options for screening for colon cancer. The gold standard is colonoscopy because, as I mentioned, it has a value of detecting polyps and treat them. But we also have a stool-based test that can be done annually. And the good thing is they are not invasive, they don't need sedation, and they don't need diet modification, they don't need preparation for that. It's just a stool test. And it has a good sensitivity and specificity. Also, we have sigmoidoscopy, which is easier than having a full colon exam by colonoscopy. And also we have CT scans that can also look and try to detect colon cancer and colon polyp at early stages.
Okay. And I think what you said is so important, that the real cons in particular of the stool-based testing, but any of the others that you mentioned, is that they have to be done more frequently. And if they're positive, that means you still need the full colonoscopy. So once I explained that to a lot of patients of mine, they're like, oh, yeah, well, of course, if I still have to get it anyway, why wouldn't I just go ahead and get the gold standard? And just, again, while we're on the topic, can you review for us, what do you recommend for people who are high risk, who have a family history of colon cancer?
Yes, that's a good question. The recommendation will be diffused depending on what is their risk factors. So depending on whether they have a family history of colon cancer or if they have a genetic test positive for a syndrome that puts them at a higher risk, will change the recommendation. If we say just based on a first degree relative having a colon cancer, then we recommend to have a colonoscopy 10 years before the age the relative have colon cancer. The frequency will be every 5 years, unless a colonoscopy showed features that recommend otherwise.
And does that count for family members, first-degree relatives with polyps?
It depends on the type of the polyp, but we generally recommend for family member of colon cancer.
Okay.
If somebody has a polyp, and then we review what histology it is, and then we will be able to tell how frequent he should get colonoscopy.
Okay. And I think we wanted to really talk about your work in clinical trials. Back a season or two ago, we talked extensively about clinical trials, and we would refer you to that episode to learn more about what a clinical trial really is. But I thought it'd be a good time to bring the topic back up because of your expertise. You've done an extra fellowship training in phase 1 clinical trials, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about the promises and realities of those very early clinical trials.
Yes, thank you for the question. Clinical trial is one of my main interests, and I think clinical trial provide a lot for the patient, for the science, and for the future generation. You know, all the drugs we use nowadays, they went through clinical trials, and if we didn't do clinical trials at that point, we wouldn't have been here. And still, standard of care, I believe, is not reaching the patient and the community goals. So I think we still have a big room for improvement. And I think the best way to do it is in the setting of a clinical trial. And clinical trial, we go through certain phases. We go from phase 1, 2, and 3 to prove that the drug is effective and safe to be used and to determine the dosing of the drug. So, you know, the drug that is approved today, it has been tested over 10 years ago. So when you are getting a drug today, that means it has been tested over the last 10 years. So it's already an old drug. So I think if we have the opportunity to be enrolled in a clinical trial, it's going to be adding to the care of the patient and adding more information and valuable output for the community as well.
And I always explain to my patients, especially in those later clinical trials, this isn't where you're being given no cancer treatment versus cancer treatment, but rather that it's standard of care plus versus standard of care. And so I think patients really want to hear that they're not going to be getting nothing. But again, those phase 1 clinical trials, first in human clinical trials, and even maybe not first in human, but first for that particular drug to be used in a particular type of cancer where it may have been used in another patient population at a different time. Talk to us about what the expectations should be on the patient side, which patients should consider phase 1 clinical trials, and what the expected outcome is.
That's right. So back to the later in phase trial, like phase 2 and 3, I always tell the patient is, if this is the standard of care is plan A, I'm trying to get them to A+. I'm trying to achieve more than what the standard of care offer. All these trials are very well regulated, very well monitored, and they don't put a patient in compromise. Even if you are getting the placebo, they make sure at least you are getting what is standard of care. Back to phase 1 clinical trial, we usually keep these for patient with cancer who doesn't have much option. So as you know, in cancer we have limited options. And when we exhaust these options, either due to lack of effectiveness or due to toxicity from the drug, we start to think about new agents. And here we bring phase 1 clinical trial. So when there is a drug or a device that is showing some promising effect in preclinical data, we come and we use a phase 1 clinical trial to try to test it in patients. Also, these trials are very well regulated. They have to have approval from the FDA. They have to have approval from an institution review board, and there will be a drug safety monitoring board. So these are very well regulated and monitored to ensure safety of the participants.
Okay. And I want to talk more about phase 1 trials and some of the exciting outcomes, but now's a really great time to take a break.
Hi, my name is Tamika Felder. I'm the founder of Survivor, CERVIVOR, and I am a cervical cancer survivor. I am so proud of our community of cervical cancer survivors and thrivers. We want to support all of those who are diagnosed with cervical cancer and show them how to make their survivorship count. Why? Because we know we can put an end to cervical cancer in our lifetime. Your story matters. No one is alone. Reach out to us at survivor.org, CERVIVOR.org. There you'll find information about cervical cancer. It's linked to the human papillomavirus, but you'll also find support. We'll be your navigator to help you through a cervical cancer diagnosis, whether you're stage 0 or stage 4, or if you've had a reoccurrence. You are not alone. We want to help you get through it. You can find us across all social media platforms. Head over to Facebook, find us, We Are Survivor, on Twitter, Instagram. We're even on Pinterest. We're everywhere that you are. So make sure that you follow us and you join our community of survivors.
Ahmed, tell us a little bit more about what's exciting in the realm of cancer clinical trials right now.
The most advancement we had in the recent year is immune checkpoint inhibitors. So since 2015, we have introduced new modality to treat cancer. So instead of giving chemotherapy, the generic chemotherapy, which is drugs that target the cells that divide fast and try to kill it, now we have a smarter way, is by training the immune system to kill the cancer cells. And we have so many agents, and they are even developing more and more every day.
So I think there's so much exciting about immunotherapy. And once again, would refer our listeners to the episode we spent entirely on immunotherapy in season 1. But there was a rectal cancer study recently with some pretty shocking results that made the national news. I understand 12 patients treated in the trial and all 12 were in remission.
That's correct. In the last American Society of Clinical Oncology meeting, we had this impressive data from a study in Memorial Sloan Kettering where they put rectal cancer patient with MMR deficiency, which is an enzyme that we use to correct mistakes that the body do while DNA replicating. Mm-hmm. And they tried immune therapy on these patients, and these patients did not get any chemotherapy or radiation or even surgery. And they reassessed them by MRI, and they found all of them 100% had complete response. This is still a very primitive data. We still need to have more mature data by longer follow-up and see how these patients behave. And still the number is small, and we had actually an updated data from the ESMO, the European Association of Medical Oncology, which they tested a similar concept by using a different agent of immune therapy in patients with MMR deficient, similar subgroup of patients, and they used 2 agents given together, but this time they did surgery. And also they found very impressive result that a lot of patients achieve complete response just by doing immune therapy.
It's really exciting stuff. You know, when I think about the future of cancer, I've said a lot, and I think I said on that episode before, that our grandchildren will think how crazy it is that we gave drugs that actually knock out your immune system, when instead we should have been supporting, promoting, kind of creating an immune system attack on these cancers. And I think the thing that I find so fascinating is at least what we believe to be happening, what the researchers believe to be happening for those folks with a prolonged complete response. I mean, what we hope is a cure, but still, even for the earliest patients treated with immunotherapy, maybe too soon. But it seems like there's this ongoing protection, almost like they have been kind of quote unquote vaccinated against their own tumor. There are, just to confuse our listeners even more, there are some therapeutic cancer vaccines out there, but this immunotherapy really does kind of break up the tumor and expose your body to it at the same time, so it creates that immunity. I'm depending on our listeners and all of us out there having a larger knowledge about the immune system since the COVID pandemic, I think, than we used to have.
That's right. It's amazing how the field is developing. And that takes us back to the clinical trial and how it is important in our practice to develop newer, effective, more durable, and less toxic treatment like the immune checkpoint inhibitor.
Mm-hmm. And yet they can have some pretty tough to get through side effects, so we never take that lightly. So always a good idea to talk with your physician about it, talk about your particular cancer and whether or not immunotherapy might be an option for you. There definitely are some cancers that it is not recommended or even hasn't worked the way that we had hoped. Another place that GI cancers in general and colorectal cancers in particular have pioneered the field is in these targeted agents. And you mentioned this clinical trial was for a specific genetic modification. Talk to us about those targeted therapies and what's the latest there.
Yeah, so this is a good point because, as you mentioned, the immune checkpoint tested in these trials only tested patients with deficient MMR, which is about, I would say, 10% of rectal cancer patients. So we should, and that's what we do now, personalized treatment. So every patient, we tend to do molecular profiling to see which genes are driving the tumor and then target the tumor accordingly. So we are going away from same treatment for every patient. So every tumor is different. Now we have many targetable mutations that we have drugs against. And this has shown, again, better response, more durable, and less toxic. So, and even for the chemotherapy now, we can test the molecular profile and tell us which chemotherapeutic agent is the best for these patients. So I think the field is advancing well and in understanding the tumor more and offering better treatment options for the patient.
Absolutely. And along with that, you are a medical oncologist, so we're talking about the medications, but the better the medicines get, the less we need, just like you were saying with these rectal cancer patients on clinical trial, the less we need surgery, which has its own set of risks and benefits, and radiation, which I think every patient who's had radiation will tell you the list of long-term side effects is so hard that sometimes they wonder, even if it cured their cancer, was all of this worth it? Of course, we say yes, it was, because that's what we needed to cure your cancer at the time. But I think we will find newer, better treatments that make those others less used.
That's right. Especially in rectal cancer now, we try to do organ preservation for many of these patients because, as you mentioned, targeting cure is the goal, but also we are trying to decrease the toxicity of the treatment. Doing surgery sometimes result in colostomy and sometimes result in sphincter dysfunction, which might have a downside effect in the quality of life down the road. So the better we get our treatment is, the better the final outcome by decreasing the morbidity of surgical and radiation treatment as well.
Absolutely. And we haven't talked a lot about patient support and support of ostomy patients and patients who have had treatment for rectal cancer. And we should mention that patients can have an ostomy even if they don't have a surgical solution for their tumor. So, just a lot of complexity to these patients, but also circling back to that idea of community. We have had support groups for these patients in the past. I know there are ostomy support groups around town. But I also wanted to bring up our new patient mentor program, which I'm super excited about, that really matches a patient with a diagnosis to someone who's agreed to be a patient mentor.
Yeah, this is actually a very important. Today in my clinic, I had a patient who asked me if he can mentor other patients because his experience and he felt he would like to share his story, because when he was started the treatment and when he received the diagnosis, he was looking for somebody that he can share with him what is the chemo means, what is the treatment means. As a physician, you can explain, but having the story coming from other patient And even for us in the clinic, we get feedback from patient about how to handle certain situation. And this is, I think, the experience of going through the treatment. You cannot meet unless you talk to somebody who went through the same. So the value of the support group is huge. And I'm glad now we start to have these programs back after having the pandemic and everything was slowed down. But it's good to have these resources for our patients.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that patient-to-patient connection is so important. And, I think it's valuable not only for the newly diagnosed patient, but it's such an incredible way to heal mentally and physically for the treated patient, for the patient in remission. Because, I always think of the three-legged stool of healing from a cancer diagnosis, regardless of outcome. I will say regardless of outcome, because I think sometimes patients who have long-term metastatic disease still find hope and healing in this process, which is the physical healing from the more toxic components of our treatments, the mental healing, the kind of shock and fear that go into both the diagnosis and then fighting and overcoming that diagnosis and living with the uncertainty that comes with life after cancer. But the third component in my mind is always that kind of finding a way to turn this negative into a positive. And it's been a theme in some of our episodes before, but really kind of taking the experience that they have had and using it for good, whether that's to help another patient, to raise money for their cancer. And I think that's why you see so many cancer patients that are advocates or want to give back or volunteer or stay connected to the field to really create this community.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I think the value of having a communication between patient is huge. And I think having the connection throughout the treatment, not just, as you said, in the beginning, but even with the treatment and how it goes till they progress more on their treatment, I think the value is huge.
Absolutely. Well, we are getting close to our time. And so I wanted to end by having you tell our listeners, what are your top 3 tips to avoid a GI cancer?
All right, so that's an excellent question, especially when we are talking about prevention. I think number 1 is diet. Eat more of fiber, fruits, vegetables, and get more of vitamin D, because vitamin D, we usually get it from the sun. Most of us now do not get much exposure, so vitamin D supplement will be helpful. Definitely no smoking and no alcohol consumption would help, and exercise. So I always tell people at least do aerobic, maybe walking half an hour a day, 5 days a week will be good, trying to prevent general GI malignancy.
That's an amazing list. It's the same list we hear, for a lot of other cancers. I think, people might be surprised to know that that's the list. And of course, we can't end without saying, and also get your screenings on time, know your family history and your genetics. And then our listeners will know that's the same list I give every time. And I love that. I love that you do those things and there's a real chance to prevent multiple cancers, including GI cancers.
And just to say, remember, colonoscopy saves lives.
Absolutely. Well, we cannot thank you enough for being on the show, Dr. Abdalla. And we so appreciate your expertise, your knowledge, and good luck with your next clinical trials.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
What an outstanding episode with Dr. Ahmed Abdalla. We are blessed to have such a talented physician in Dr. Abdalla at the Mitchell Cancer Institute. And we are all so lucky to hear his knowledge and insights on clinical trials and screening and tumor boards. I just love how he expressed that he and his team use the information in hand plus the patient's goals to make the best decision for every patient, for treatment, for recovery, and for survivorship. I also want to congratulate the MCI rectal cancer team on earning the program's national accreditation, the only one in the state of Alabama, I might add. After talking with Dr. Abdalla, I can see why he and his fellow teammates are having such success and national recognition. Ahmed, thank you for being here, for sharing your knowledge and educating all of us on immunotherapy, the importance of clinical trials and screenings, and how all of these innovations are going to benefit our health and our lives. And thank you all out there. Thanks for listening. Let's all be healthier, be happier, and remember, cancering affects us all. Thanks again for listening. And don't forget to submit your questions at www.cancering.com. We're going to be doing 2 special episodes throughout the season. We're here for all of those questions and we'll get you the answers. This show is brought to you by the University of South Alabama Mitchell Cancer Institute. MCI is a cutting-edge cancer research and patient center built to fight cancer smarter in Mobile and Baldwin County, Alabama. Our researchers and clinicians focus daily on the struggle against cancer, serving a potential catchment population of more than 4.1 million people, with a singular focus of advancing cancer diagnosis, treatment, and prevention throughout the Gulf Coast and beyond, with science, technology, and hope. Want to know more about the Mitchell Cancer Institute? Visit us at usamci.com or search for us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Mitchell Cancer Institute is a member of USA Health. To learn more about all of our hospitals, clinics, and services, visit usahealthsystem.com.